The flour dust hung in the afternoon light like tiny stars falling through the bakery window, and Olivia Emerson watched them settle with the same resignation she felt settling into her own bones. It was June 1882 in Las Animas, Colorado, and the small town that had once thrived on cattle drives and railroad promises now seemed to be slowly dying, taking her dreams with it. She wiped her hands on her apron, leaving white streaks across the faded blue fabric, and looked around the shop that had been her whole world for the past 3 years. The wooden counters she had scrubbed until they gleamed, the cast iron oven that had burned her hands more times than she could count, the shelves that had once displayed rows of golden bread and delicate pastries, now mostly empty. Tomorrow she would lock the door for the last time. The bell above the entrance chimed, and Olivia looked up from the accounts ledger where she had been tallying her final numbers. A tall man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the harsh Colorado sun. He removed his hat as he stepped inside, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the collar and eyes the color of summer sky. Dust covered his boots and the lower half of his duster coat, marking him as someone who had been riding hard. "I am sorry, but I am nearly out of inventory," Olivia said, forcing a polite smile despite the heaviness in her chest. "I only have a few dinner rolls left and perhaps some cornbread from this morning." The cowboy looked around the shop, his gaze moving slowly across the empty shelves and the packed crates stacked in the corner. When his eyes finally settled on her, there was an intensity there that made her breath catch. "Are you closing down?" Olivia felt her cheeks flush. The shame of failure never got easier, no matter how many times she explained it. "Yes, tomorrow is my last day. The railroad brought in cheaper goods from the east, and people prefer the convenience of the general store now. They can buy their flour and sugar and pick up a loaf of bread all in one place." He stepped closer to the counter, and she noticed the way he moved with a careful grace despite his size. He was probably in his late 20s, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days of stubble and hands that looked equally capable of handling a horse or a gun. "What is your name?" The directness of the question surprised her. "Olivia Emerson. Flynn Crawford." He extended his hand across the counter, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused but warm, and he held her hand just a moment longer than necessary. "Miss Emerson, I have a proposition for you." "I am not interested in propositions from strange men," Olivia said, pulling her hand back and lifting her chin. She had dealt with enough roughnecks and drifters over the years to know how to hold her ground. To her surprise, Flynn smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face, softening the hard edges travel had carved there. "I apologize. That came out wrong. What I mean is, I would like to buy your bakery." Olivia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Buy it?" "Yes, madam. The building, the equipment, everything. And I would like to hire you to keep doing exactly what you have been doing, baking." The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. Olivia gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "That is absurd. I just told you the bakery is failing." "Why would you want to buy a failing business?" Flynn set his hat on the counter and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a leather wallet thick with bills. "Because I am not buying it to run it the same way. I have been working cattle drives for 10 years, saving every penny. I own a ranch about 15 miles north of here, up in the foothills. I have 20 men working for me, and that number is going to double by fall. Those men need to eat, Miss Emerson, and I am tired of burnt beans and hardtack. I need a baker, and from what I have heard, you are the best in 3 counties. Olivia felt her heart begin to race. Hope was a dangerous thing, she had learned, but it bloomed in her chest anyway. You want me to bake for your ranch hands. I want you to bake for my ranch, yes. Bread, biscuits, pies, whatever you can make. I will pay you a fair wage, provide room and board, and cover all the costs of supplies. You would have complete control over the kitchen. All I ask is that you keep my men fed with something better than what they have been choking down. It was too good to be true. Olivia had learned that lesson the hard way when her father had lost everything in a bad mining investment back in Missouri, leaving her mother dead from heartbreak, and Olivia alone at 21 years old. She had come west with nothing but her grandmother's recipes and a stubborn determination to make something of herself. For 3 years, she had poured her heart into this bakery, and for 3 years, she had watched it slowly crumble despite her best efforts. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are other bakers, other cooks." Flynn leaned against the counter, his eyes never leaving her face. 2 weeks ago, I was passing through town and stopped at the hotel for supper. The owner served me a slice of apple pie that was so good I ate 3 pieces and asked where it came from. She told me about you, about how you made the best baked goods in Colorado, but that you were struggling because people wanted convenience over quality. I have spent 10 years eating convenient food, Miss Emerson. I am ready for quality. Olivia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how kind his words were. "I would need to see the ranch first, see the kitchen facilities." "Of course. I can take you there tomorrow if you are willing. Bring whatever you need to make a decision. If you do not like what you see, I will pay you for your time and trouble, and we will part ways. But I hope you will at least consider it." She studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but found only honest earnestness. He was offering her a lifeline when she had been drowning, and every instinct told her to grab hold of it with both hands. But she had learned caution the hard way. "I will consider it," she said finally. "Come back tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. I will have my things ready." Flynn's smile could have lit up the darkest night. He placed several bills on the counter, for the building and equipment. "I will have my lawyer draw up the papers today. And Miss Emerson, thank you for giving me a chance." He put his hat back on and left before she could respond, the bell chiming cheerfully as the door swung shut behind him. Olivia looked down at the money on the counter, more than enough to cover her debts and have a little left over. Her hands trembled as she picked up the bills, feeling the weight of possibility in her palms. That night, Olivia lay awake in the small room above the bakery, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she had lost her mind. She knew nothing about Flynn Crawford except that he had kind eyes and a ranch that needed a baker. He could be anyone, could be leading her into any kind of situation. But what other choice did she have? She had exactly $12 to her name after paying off her creditors, not enough to start over anywhere else, not enough to even buy passage back to Missouri, not that she would go back there anyway. She rose before dawn and packed her few possessions into 2 carpet bags. Her clothes, her grandmother's recipe book, the few pieces of jewelry her mother had left her, and the daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Everything else in the building belonged to the bakery and would now belong to Flynn. At precisely 8 o'clock, a wagon pulled up in front of the bakery. Flynn climbed down, dressed in a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. He looked younger in the morning light, maybe only a few years older than her own 24 years. "Good morning, Miss Emerson. Are you ready?" Olivia took a deep breath and nodded. She locked the bakery door one final time and handed Flynn the key. He helped her up onto the wagon seat with careful courtesy, then loaded her bags in the back. The ride north took them out of Las Animas, and into rolling hills that gradually gave way to more rugged terrain. Flynn kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her about the ranch he had built from nothing, about the cattle he raised and the horses he bred. His voice was pleasant, with a slight drawl that spoke of time spent in Texas, and Olivia found herself relaxing despite her nerves. "I bought the land 5 years ago," Flynn explained as they climbed higher into the foothills. "It was nothing but scrub brush and rocks, but there was good water and plenty of grazing. I started with 50 head of cattle and 2 horses. Now I am running close to 2,000 head, and I have the finest quarter horses in Colorado." "That is impressive," Olivia said, genuinely meaning it. She knew enough about ranching to understand how much work went into building something from nothing. "It has been hard," Flynn admitted. "There were times I thought about giving up, selling everything and heading further west. But this land, it gets into your blood. Once you have claimed a piece of Colorado, nothing else feels like home." Olivia understood that sentiment more than she could express. Despite her struggles, she had fallen in love with this harsh, beautiful territory. They crested a hill and Flynn pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is, the Crawford Ranch." Olivia caught her breath. Below them, nestled in a valley where a creek ran silver in the sunlight, stood a sprawling ranch house built of logs and stone. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a bunkhouse, and various sheds and corrals. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and she could see men working horses in a large pen near the barn. It was beautiful and prosperous, and so much more than she had expected. "The main house has 6 bedrooms," Flynn said, a note of pride in his voice. "I know that seems excessive for one man, but I built it thinking about the future. The kitchen is large with a good stove. I had it shipped from Chicago last year. There is a separate room off the kitchen that I thought could be your bedroom if you decide to stay. It has a window facing east so you would get the morning light." He was already thinking about where she would sleep, planning for her comfort. The gesture touched something deep in Olivia's chest. "It is beautiful, Mr. Crawford." "Flynn," he corrected gently. "If we are going to be working together, we should use first names. May I call you Olivia?" "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible over the creaking of the wagon as they started down the hill. As they approached the main house, men stopped their work to watch. Olivia felt their curious stares and straightened her spine, refusing to show any nervousness. Flynn pulled the wagon up in front of the house and jumped down, then reached up to help her descend. His hands on her waist were gentle but firm, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather. "Let me show you the kitchen," Flynn said, breaking the moment. He grabbed her bags and led her up the steps to a wide porch that wrapped around the front of the house. The interior was surprisingly refined for a bachelor ranch house. The main room had comfortable furniture grouped around a large stone fireplace, and the floors were polished wood. Everything was clean and well maintained. Flynn led her through to the kitchen, and Olivia could not suppress a small gasp of delight. It was enormous, at least 3 times the size of her bakery kitchen. The stove Flynn had mentioned dominated one wall, a beautiful cast iron range with 6 burners and 2 ovens. Long wooden counters provided ample workspace, and there were shelves and cupboards everywhere. A large window over the sink looked out toward the mountains, and another window on the opposite wall let in southern light. The room off to the side had a comfortable-looking bed, a dresser, and the promised east-facing window. "This is incredible," Olivia said, running her hand along the smooth counter surface. "I could bake anything in here." Flynn set her bags in the bedroom, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Does that mean you will stay?" Olivia turned to face him, seeing the hope in his eyes, the same hope she felt blooming in her own chest. This was a chance to do what she loved without the constant worry of keeping a failing business afloat. This was stability, security, and a kitchen that most bakers could only dream of. "Yes," she said, "I will stay." The relief on Flynn's face was unmistakable. "Thank you. You do not know what this means to me, to all of us. The men are going to think they have died and gone to heaven when they taste your cooking. When do you want me to start?" Olivia asked, already mentally cataloging what supplies she would need. "How about tomorrow? That will give you today to settle in, see what we have in the pantry and what you need me to order. I will introduce you to the men at supper tonight. We usually eat in the bunkhouse, but I thought we could have supper here tonight so you can get your bearings." "Just the two of us?" Olivia asked, suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation. She was an unmarried woman living in a house with an unmarried man, even if they would be employer and employee. Flynn seemed to read her thoughts. "I should have mentioned this before. Mrs. Torres, she is the wife of my foreman, comes in 3 times a week to clean and has been doing the basic cooking. She will be here for supper tonight and can serve as chaperone whenever you feel it is needed. I do not want anyone questioning your reputation, Olivia." The fact that he had thought of this, had planned for her comfort and respectability, made Olivia like him even more. "Thank you, Flynn. That is very considerate. It is just decent," he said with a shrug. "Now let me show you the pantry and then I will let you rest while I get back to work." The pantry was well stocked with basics, but desperately needed the touch of someone who actually knew how to cook. Olivia made mental notes of everything she would need, her mind already spinning with possibilities. When Flynn finally left to return to his work, she unpacked her few belongings and then spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the kitchen and making lists. Mrs. Torres arrived at 4 o'clock, a round woman in her 50s with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. She looked Olivia over with frank appraisal. "So you are the baker Flynn has been talking about for 2 weeks. He drove us all crazy wondering if you would agree to come." "He has been talking about me?" Olivia asked, surprised. "Non-stop," Mrs. Torres said with a laugh. "Flynn is a good man, one of the best I have known, but he gets an idea in his head and cannot let it go. After he tasted your pie, he was determined to convince you to work for him. My husband said he had never seen Flynn so focused on something that was not cattle or horses." Olivia felt a strange warmth in her chest at this information. "Well, I am here now. Can I help you with supper?" Mrs. Torres waved her away. "Tonight you are a guest. Tomorrow you can work yourself to the bone feeding all those hungry men. Tonight you sit and let me take care of things." Supper was simple but well prepared. Beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread that Mrs. Torres admitted came from the general store in town. Flynn joined them promptly at 6, having washed and changed into clean clothes. He sat at the head of the long dining table with Olivia on his right and Mrs. Torres on his left, and the conversation flowed easily. Flynn told stories about the ranch, about the challenges of the cattle business and the characters who worked for him. Mrs. Torres added her own observations and gentle teasing, clearly having a comfortable relationship with her employer. Olivia found herself laughing more than she had in months, the tension she had been carrying slowly seeping away. After supper, Mrs. Torres left to return to her own home near the bunkhouse, and Olivia helped Flynn clear the dishes despite his protests. "You do not have to do that," he said. "You are not a maid." "I am not a lady of leisure either," Olivia countered. "Besides, I need to learn where everything goes if I am going to be working in this kitchen." They worked in companionable silence, and Olivia was acutely aware of Flynn's presence beside her at the sink. He was tall enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes, and there was a solid strength about him that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her father was alive. "Can I ask you something?" Flynn said as he dried the last plate. "Of course. Why did you really agree to come?" "It is a big risk, leaving everything you know to work for a stranger." Olivia considered the question carefully. "Because I had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Because you offered me a chance to do what I love without the burden of business ownership. Because something in my gut told me to trust you." Flynn set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. "I am glad you trusted your gut. I promise you, Olivia, I will do everything in my power to make sure you do not regret this decision." The intensity in his voice, in his eyes, made her heart skip. "I believe you." That night, lying in her new bed in the room off the kitchen, Olivia listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Horses nickering in the corrals, the distant lowing of cattle, the wind moving through the pine trees on the surrounding hills. It was so different from the sounds of town, from the rattle of wagons and the noise of the saloon down the street. This was peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt like she might be exactly where she was supposed to be. She rose before dawn the next morning, her body trained by years of baking to wake when the world was still dark. She lit lamps in the kitchen and surveyed her domain, then pulled out her grandmother's recipe book. Today she would make bread, dozens of loaves for hungry ranch hands and biscuits for breakfast, and maybe a few pies if time allowed. Flynn appeared in the kitchen doorway as the first batch of biscuits was coming out of the oven. His hair was tousled from sleep, and he wore no vest, just his shirt untucked and suspenders hanging at his sides. The casual intimacy of seeing him this way made Olivia flush. "I am sorry," she stammered. "I did not mean to wake you. You did not. I always rise early." He moved closer, drawn by the smell of fresh biscuits. "Those smell like heaven." "Try one," Olivia said, feeling suddenly shy. This was the first thing she had made for him, and she wanted desperately for him to like it. Flynn took a biscuit and broke it open, steam rising from the fluffy interior. He took a bite, and his eyes closed in an expression of pure bliss. "My God, Olivia, this is incredible." She felt a ridiculous surge of pride. "It is just a biscuit. It is not just anything. This is the best thing I have tasted in my entire life." He finished the biscuit in 3 more bites and reached for another. "If everything you make is this good, my men are going to worship you." By the time the ranch hands gathered for breakfast at 7 o'clock, Olivia had prepared a feast. Dozens of golden biscuits, scrambled eggs, fried potatoes, bacon, and gravy. The men filed into the bunkhouse dining area, and Olivia felt their curious stares as Flynn introduced her. "This is Miss Olivia Emerson, our new baker. She will be preparing all your meals from now on, and I expect every one of you to treat her with the utmost respect. Anyone who causes her even a moment of trouble will answer to me. Understood?" A chorus of "Yes, boss," echoed through the room, and then the men descended on the food like locusts. Olivia watched nervously from the doorway as they filled their plates, waiting for their reactions. The first man to take a bite of a biscuit actually stopped chewing and stared at it in wonder. "Holy hell," he breathed. Then chaos erupted as everyone tried to talk at once, praising the food and asking for seconds before they had even finished their firsts. Flynn stood beside Olivia, his arm brushing hers. "I told you," he said quietly. "They are never going to let you leave now." Over the following days, Olivia fell into a rhythm. She rose before dawn to start bread and prepare breakfast, spent the mornings baking for supper and preparing the noon meal, took a few hours rest in the afternoon, then finished supper preparations. It was hard work, harder in some ways than running her bakery had been, but it was also deeply satisfying. The men appreciated every single thing she made, and their genuine gratitude filled a hole in her heart she had not even known was there. Flynn took to spending more time in the main house, often appearing in the kitchen in the evenings after the men had been fed. He would sit at the table and talk to Olivia while she cleaned up, telling her about his day, asking about hers. Sometimes he helped dry dishes despite her protests. Sometimes he just watched her work, a soft expression on his face that made her pulse quicken. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Flynn brought in fresh strawberries he had found growing wild near the creek. "I thought maybe you could make something with these," he said, setting the basket on the counter. Olivia picked up a berry and examined it, perfect and ripe and sweet-smelling. "I could make a pie or maybe a cake. What would you like?" "Surprise me," Flynn said, then added more quietly, "You are good at that." She looked up and found him watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize. There was admiration there and something warmer, something that made her breath catch. They had been dancing around each other for weeks, their conversations growing longer and more personal, their accidental touches lingering just a moment too long. "Flynn," she said softly. "Olivia," he replied, not moving, not looking away. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then Flynn seemed to shake himself and stepped back. "I should let you work. Thank you for everything you do. I hope you know how much it means to me." He left before she could respond, and Olivia stood alone in the kitchen, holding a strawberry and wondering what it would have felt like if he had stayed, if he had closed the distance between them, if he had said what she saw in his eyes. She made strawberry hand pies, delicate pastries filled with the sweet fruit, and left a plate of them in Flynn's study. The next morning she found a note in his strong, neat handwriting. "These were worth waiting for. Thank you. F." Summer deepened into July and the ranch work intensified. Flynn was gone from before dawn until after dark most days, checking on cattle in far pastures and overseeing the breaking of new horses. Olivia saw him less, but when she did, the air between them seemed charged with everything unsaid. Mrs. Torres noticed, of course. "That man is in love with you," she said one afternoon while helping Olivia pit cherries for preserves. "That is ridiculous," Olivia protested, but her cheeks flushed hot. "He is my employer. He looks at you the way my husband looked at me when we were courting. Like you are water and he has been dying of thirst, and you look at him the same way. Do not pretend you do not." Olivia could not deny it. She had fallen for Flynn Crawford somewhere between his kind eyes and his gentle respect, between his genuine appreciation for her work and the way he talked to her like her thoughts and opinions mattered. She loved his quiet strength and his ambitious dreams, and the way he cared for everyone who worked for him. She loved how he always smelled of leather and sunshine, how his rare smiles transformed his face, how his hands were both rough and gentle. But he was her employer and she was his employee, and there was a line there that neither of them had crossed. That evening, Flynn knocked on the kitchen door frame. "Can I talk to you?" Olivia set down the bread dough she had been kneading and wiped her hands on her apron. "Of course." He stepped into the kitchen, hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I need to go to Denver next week to meet with some cattle buyers. I will be gone for about 5 days. I wanted to tell you myself so you would not wonder where I went." "Oh," Olivia said, surprised by the sharp disappointment she felt. "Of course, I hope the trip goes well. Come with me." The words hung in the air between them. Olivia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" Flynn set his hat on the table and moved closer. "Come to Denver with me. You have been working non-stop since you got here. You deserve a break, a chance to see the city. We could go to restaurants, see a show at the theater. I would get you your own hotel room, of course. Everything proper and respectable. I just want to spend time with you away from the ranch." Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. "Why?" "Because I am tired of pretending," Flynn said, his voice rough. "I am tired of keeping my distance and watching every word I say. I care about you, Olivia, more than an employer should care about an employee. More than I have ever cared about anyone, and I hope, that you might feel the same way." She should say no. She should maintain professional boundaries and protect her heart, but she was so tired of being careful, of holding back, of denying what she felt. "I do," she whispered. "I do feel the same way." Flynn closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks with infinite tenderness. "Can I kiss you?" Olivia nodded, not trusting her voice, and Flynn lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but when she pressed closer he deepened it, one hand sliding into her hair while the other wrapped around her waist. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was everything he had been searching for, and Olivia melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt to pull him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "Say you will come to Denver with me." "Please?" "Yes," Olivia said, feeling like she was floating. "Yes, I will come." The week until the trip seemed to crawl by. Flynn was busy preparing for his absence, making sure his foreman had clear instructions for everything that needed to be done. Olivia taught Mrs. Torres how to make basic meals for the ranch hands and prepared as much food as she could in advance. But in the evenings, Flynn would find her in the kitchen or on the porch, and they would talk for hours, slowly revealing themselves to each other. Flynn told her about growing up poor in Texas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16 and striking out on his own. He talked about the hard years working other men's cattle, saving every penny, dreaming of having his own land. He spoke of loneliness and determination, and the fear that he might never have anything more than work to fill his days. Olivia shared her own story, the pain of losing her father and then her mother, the desperation that had driven her west, the stubborn pride that had kept her fighting for a failing bakery long after she should have admitted defeat. She told him about the shame of failure and the terror of not knowing what came next, right up until the moment he had walked through her door and offered her a second chance. "I do not think it was chance," Flynn said one night as they sat on the porch steps watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I think it was fate. I think we were supposed to find each other." Olivia leaned against his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her waist. "I am starting to believe in fate." They left for Denver on a Monday morning, taking the train from La Junta because it was faster than the stage. Flynn had reserved them separate compartments, maintaining propriety even as his hand found hers under the cover of her skirt as they sat in the dining car. Denver was overwhelming and exciting, and so much bigger than anything Olivia had experienced. Flynn had reserved rooms at the Windsor Hotel, the finest establishment in the city, and when Olivia protested the expense, he simply smiled and said, "I have been saving for 10 years. Let me spend some of it on something that makes me happy." He took her shopping, insisting she needed new dresses, though the ones she had were perfectly serviceable. He bought her a beautiful blue gown that matched her eyes and another in deep green that made her hair look like spun gold. They ate at restaurants where the food was fancy but, Olivia thought privately, not nearly as good as what she could make. They went to the Tabor Grand Opera House and watched a traveling theater company perform, and Olivia cried at the beauty of it while Flynn held her hand in the darkness. On the third night, after a dinner of roasted duck and potatoes, they walked through the warm evening along Larimer Street. Olivia held Flynn's arm, feeling like she was living someone else's life, someone luckier and more deserving than herself. Are you happy? Flynn asked, stopping to look down at her. Happier than I have ever been, Olivia admitted. This has been like a dream. It does not have to be a dream. It could be real, permanent. Flynn took both her hands in his, right there on the busy street with people flowing around them. Marry me, Olivia. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for 2 months, but I have never been more certain of anything. I love you. I love your strength and your talent and your kind heart. I love the way you hum when you bake and the way you listen when I talk about my dreams. I love that you took a chance on me when you had every reason not to. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy. Olivia felt tears streaming down her face. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, I will marry you. Flynn swept her into his arms and kissed her right there in the middle of the street, and Olivia did not care who saw or what anyone thought. She was in love with a man who loved her back, who valued her and respected her, and wanted to build a life with her. After all the loss and disappointment and struggle, she had found her home in the arms of a cowboy who had walked into her failing bakery and offered her forever. They found a jewelry store still open, and Flynn bought her a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious but perfect in its sincerity. He slipped it on her finger right there in the shop, and the jeweler congratulated them with genuine warmth. When do you want to get married? Flynn asked as they walked back to the hotel, Olivia admiring the way the ring caught the lamplight. Soon, Olivia said. I do not want a big wedding, just something simple. Maybe at the ranch with your men and Mrs. Torres. Whatever you want, Flynn promised. Though I should warn you, Mrs. Torres is going to want to throw you a party that all of Las Animas will talk about for years. They were married 3 weeks later in the main room of the ranch house, with Mrs. Torres weeping happily and every ranch hand in their Sunday best. The circuit preacher came out from town and performed the ceremony, and if he had any concerns about the speed of the courtship, the obvious love between the bride and groom silenced them. Olivia wore the blue dress from Denver, and Flynn wore a new suit he had ordered from the Sears catalog. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn kissed her with such tenderness that Olivia felt her knees weaken. The celebration lasted well into the night, with food Olivia and Mrs. Torres had prepared over several days and music from one of the ranch hands who played fiddle surprisingly well. Olivia danced with Flynn under the stars, his arms strong around her waist, and thought about how her life had transformed from despair to joy in the span of a few short months. Later, alone in the bedroom they would now share, Flynn was gentle and patient, making their first night together about love rather than just passion. Olivia had been nervous, but Flynn took his time, whispering how beautiful she was, how much he loved her, until nervousness gave way to pleasure and the wonder of truly belonging to someone. I cannot believe you are real, Flynn murmured against her hair afterward, holding her close. I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this was all a dream. If it is a dream, then we are both dreaming it, Olivia said, tracing patterns on his chest. And I never want to wake up. Life as Mrs. Flynn Crawford was everything Olivia could have hoped for and more. She still baked for the ranch hands, but now she also managed the household and helped Flynn with the ranch accounts, discovering she had a head for numbers. Flynn consulted her on business decisions, valuing her input and often following her suggestions. They were partners in every sense of the word. The ranch continued to prosper. Flynn's cattle business grew, and he started breeding horses in earnest, developing a reputation for quality quarter horses that could work cattle and handle rough terrain. Olivia's baking became famous in its own right, with neighboring ranchers sometimes stopping by hoping to trade for her bread or pies. Their first winter together was hard, with blizzards that sometimes kept them snowbound for days at a time. But Olivia loved the forced intimacy. The long nights curled together by the fire while wind howled outside. Flynn read to her from books he ordered from Denver, and she taught him to make simple pastries, laughing at his clumsy attempts to roll out dough. Spring brought new calves and foals, and Olivia fell in love with the cycle of ranch life, the constant renewal and growth. She also discovered she was pregnant, and when she told Flynn the news one evening after supper, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be a family." "We already are a family," Olivia said, but she understood what he meant. The baby growing inside her was the ultimate symbol of their love, proof that they were building something that would last beyond themselves. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1884, during a brief break between snowstorms. The doctor from Las Animas made it to the ranch just in time, and Mrs. Torres stayed by Olivia's side through the long hours of labor, coaching and encouraging her. Flynn paced outside the bedroom door, and when the baby's first cry rang out, he burst into the room despite Mrs. Torres's protests. "Is Olivia all right? Is the baby all right?" he demanded, going straight to the bed where Olivia lay exhausted but smiling. "We are both fine," Olivia assured him. "Come meet your son." Flynn looked down at the tiny red-faced baby in her arms, and tears streamed down his face. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you for giving me everything I never knew I needed." They named him Thomas Flynn Crawford after Flynn's father, and he was a happy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Flynn was a devoted father, often taking the baby with him around the ranch in a sling Olivia fashioned, showing him the land that would one day be his. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Olivia hired a girl from town to help with the heavy baking work, freeing her to spend more time with Thomas and Flynn. The ranch continued to grow, and Flynn bought more land, expanding their holdings until the Crawford Ranch was one of the largest in southern Colorado. When Thomas was 2, Olivia became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Olivia's mother. Flynn was just as besotted with his daughter as he had been with his son, and Olivia often found him asleep in the rocking chair in the nursery, the baby on his chest. "You are going to spoil her," Olivia teased one evening, finding them like that again. "She is my daughter," Flynn said, carefully transferring Sarah to her cradle. "I am allowed to spoil her. Besides, you spoil Thomas just as much." It was true. Olivia had never imagined she could love anyone as much as she loved Flynn, but their children opened new chambers in her heart she had not known existed. 2 more children followed over the next 5 years, another son named James and a daughter named Catherine. The house that had seemed too large for one man was now filled with laughter and noise and life. Olivia hired more help, young women from town who wanted to learn baking and cooking, and she trained them with the same patience her grandmother had shown her. Flynn expanded the ranch house, adding more bedrooms and a larger dining room to accommodate their growing family and the frequent visits from neighbors and business associates. The Crawford Ranch became known not just for quality cattle and horses, but for hospitality, thanks to Olivia's welcoming nature and incredible food. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Flynn surprised Olivia with a trip back to Denver, just the 2 of them. Mrs. Torres and her daughter stayed with the children, and Flynn and Olivia retraced their steps from that first trip, visiting the same restaurants and returning to the opera house. "You ever regret it?" Flynn asked one evening as they sat in their hotel room overlooking the city. "Giving up your bakery, tying yourself to a cowboy and a ranch in the middle of nowhere. Olivia moved to sit on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. I regret nothing. You gave me a life I could never have imagined. You gave me love and family and purpose. That bakery was failing, Flynn. I was failing. You saved me. No, Flynn said firmly, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. You saved yourself. You were brave enough to take a risk on a stranger and strong enough to build a new life. I just gave you an opportunity. You did all the hard work. We did it together, Olivia corrected. Everything we have, we built together. Flynn kissed her then, deep and passionate, and they made love like they were young again, without the exhaustion of children and ranch work weighing on them. Afterward, lying tangled together in the hotel bed, Olivia felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought her to that failing bakery on the exact day a cowboy walked in looking for a baker. The years continued to pass, marked by the growth of their children and the expansion of the ranch. Thomas showed an early aptitude for working with horses and spent hours with his father learning the business. Sarah inherited her mother's talent for baking and could often be found in the kitchen, standing on a stool to reach the counter. James was quieter, more bookish, already talking about becoming a lawyer. Catherine was still too young to show her interests, but she had her father wrapped completely around her tiny finger. Flynn's hair started to show silver at the temples, and Olivia found smile lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. They were getting older, but their love had only deepened with time. Flynn still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and Olivia still felt her heart skip when he walked into a room. One evening, when Thomas was 15 and already taller than his father, the whole family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. The younger children played with a puppy they had recently acquired, their laughter ringing across the yard. Flynn sat in his rocking chair with Olivia perched on the arm, his hand resting on her waist. "Did you ever imagine this?" Olivia asked quietly. "When you were young and working those cattle drives, did you imagine having all of this?" Flynn looked at his children, at his land stretching out in all directions, at his wife by his side. "No," he admitted. "My dreams were not this big. I thought if I could just own some land and run some cattle, that would be enough. I never dreamed I would have a family like this, a woman like you. This is beyond anything I could have imagined." "Me too," Olivia said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "When I was closing that bakery, I thought my life was over. I thought I had failed at the only thing I was good at. I never imagined that failure would lead me here to this. Sometimes the best things come from what feels like the worst moments," Flynn said. "If your bakery had been successful, I would have walked right past it. You would have had no reason to leave. We might never have met." It was a sobering thought. How easily they could have missed each other, their lives going on separate paths, never knowing what they were missing. But fate, or luck, or divine intervention had brought them together at exactly the right moment, and they had been brave enough to seize the opportunity. Thomas joined the ranch operation full-time when he turned 18, proving to have an even better eye for horses than his father. Together, they built the horse breeding program into something truly special, with Crawford quarter horses selling for premium prices across Colorado and into Wyoming. Sarah opened her own bakery in Las Animas when she was 20, with financial backing from her parents, but all her own recipes and determination. The townspeople who had once preferred the convenience of the general store lined up for Sarah Crawford's baked goods, and within a year, she had to hire help to keep up with demand. Olivia felt a deep pride watching her daughter succeed where she had struggled, carrying on the family tradition in her own way. James did become a lawyer, attending school in Denver, and then returning to practice in La Junta, helping ranchers with contracts and land disputes. He married a schoolteacher and gave Flynn and Olivia their first grandchildren, twin boys who looked exactly like their grandfather. Catherine surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, one of the first women in Colorado to do so. She worked alongside her father and brother, caring for the horses and cattle on the ranch and eventually expanding to serve neighboring ranches as well. Flynn and Olivia watched their children build their own lives with the same pride and wonder they had felt watching them take their first steps. The ranch house that had once echoed with the sounds of young children, now filled with grandchildren during holidays and family gatherings. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration that rivaled their original wedding. Sarah baked an enormous cake, and the festivities lasted 3 days, with friends and neighbors coming from all over to congratulate the couple who had built an empire on hard work and love. 25 years, Flynn said during a quiet moment alone with Olivia on the second night. They had escaped the party to walk down to the creek, the same creek that had been running through the property since before they arrived. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. I know what you mean, Olivia said, holding his hand as they walked. They were both graying now, with Flynn's hair almost completely silver and lines marking both their faces. But to Olivia, he was still the handsome cowboy who had walked into her bakery and changed her life. Do you remember what you said to me that first day? That you wanted me to bake for you forever, Flynn laughed. I remember. I was so nervous you would say no. Forever seemed like such a long time then, Olivia mused. Now it does not feel like nearly enough. Flynn stopped walking and pulled her into his arms. Then we will have to make the most of every moment we have left. I love you, Olivia Crawford. More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow. I love you too, Olivia whispered against his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong. Thank you for buying my bakery. Thank you for being brave enough to ask me to stay. Thank you for forever. They stood there by the creek as the sun set behind the mountains, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. The ranch Flynn had started with 50 head of cattle, now ran thousands. The bakery Olivia had been forced to close had transformed into a new legacy carried on by their daughter. The empty house Flynn had built hoping for a future family now rang with the voices of children and grandchildren. From desperation and determination, from one cowboy's craving for good food and one baker's willingness to take a risk, an empire had been born. But more importantly, a love story had unfolded, the kind that proved sometimes the best things in life come when we are brave enough to say yes to possibility, even when the future is uncertain. The years that followed were gentler, with Flynn and Olivia gradually turning over more of the ranch operations to Thomas, while still remaining involved in major decisions. They traveled occasionally, visiting James and his family, spending time in Sarah's bakery, marveling at Catherine's skill with animals. But they always returned to the ranch, to the home they had built together. Olivia still baked, though not with the same intensity as before. She taught her grandchildren her grandmother's recipes, passing down the tradition to another generation. Flynn still rode out to check on the cattle and horses, though he moved a bit slower and let Thomas handle the more demanding work. They celebrated their 30th anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their children, with a dinner at the ranch house. Olivia made all of Flynn's favorites, and Sarah contributed a magnificent cake. After dinner, Flynn stood and raised his glass. 30 years ago, I walked into a bakery in Las Animas not knowing that my life was about to change forever. I met a woman who was strong and talented and brave, and I had the audacity to ask her to take a chance on me. Olivia, you have given me 30 years of happiness beyond measure. You have given me children and grandchildren, a home filled with love, and a partnership that has made every challenge easier and every success sweeter. Here is to 30 more years, if we are blessed with them, and to loving each other through whatever comes. Olivia wiped tears from her eyes as everyone toasted. When the children had gone to put the grandchildren to bed, she and Flynn sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, holding hands across the space between them. You ever think about that day? Olivia asked. About how different everything could have been. All the time, Flynn admitted. I think about how close I came to riding right past your bakery. I almost did not stop. I was in a hurry to get back to the ranch. But something made me stop, some instinct that told me I needed to go inside. I am so glad you listened to that instinct, Olivia said. I was at my lowest point that day. I had nothing left, no hope, no future. And then you walked in and offered me everything. We offered each other everything, Flynn corrected. I was lonely, Olivia. I had land and cattle and money, but I was lonely. I had built a house for a family I did not have, filled it with rooms for children I thought I would never father. You gave me a reason for all of it. You made it mean something. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and horses whinnied in response. The sounds of the ranch, the sounds that had become the soundtrack of their life together. More years passed, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Flynn developed arthritis in his hands but still insisted on helping with the horses. Olivia's knees ached on cold mornings, but she still rose early to make breakfast for Flynn, a habit too ingrained to break. On a morning in early summer, 38 years after Flynn had first walked into Olivia's bakery, he did not come down for breakfast. Olivia found him still in bed, having passed peacefully in his sleep. The doctor said his heart had simply stopped, that he likely felt no pain, but Olivia felt like her own heart had stopped as well. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over Colorado to pay respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Flynn was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch. Under a pine tree he had planted the year Thomas was born. Olivia stood beside the grave with her children and grandchildren around her, and she thought her grief would swallow her whole. But as the weeks passed, Olivia found strength in her family and in the legacy she and Flynn had built together. The ranch continued under Thomas's capable management. Sarah's bakery thrived. James handled the legal complexities of the estate with patience and care. Catherine took over the veterinary care of the ranch animals with the same dedication her father had shown. Olivia lived 2 more years after Flynn's death, years filled with bittersweet moments. She still baked occasionally, finding comfort in the familiar motions. She told stories about Flynn to the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, making sure they knew about the man who had built the foundation for everything they had. She visited his grave every day, sitting under the pine tree and talking to him like he was still there. On a quiet morning in October, Olivia did not come down for breakfast. Sarah found her in the same bed where Flynn had died, peaceful and smiling. On the bedside table was her grandmother's recipe book, open to the page for apple pie, the dessert that had started everything. They buried her beside Flynn, under the same pine tree, and the entire town of Las Animas mourned the loss of a woman who had been as much a part of the community's history as the railroad and the cattle drives. The Crawford Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's children, and then their children. Sarah's bakery was passed down through 3 generations of Crawford women, each one adding their own recipes while honoring Olivia's original ones. James's law practice became Crawford and Sons, serving southern Colorado for decades. Catherine's veterinary work revolutionized animal care in the region, and a scholarship was established in her name at Colorado State University. But what endured more than the businesses and the land and the money was the story itself. The story of a baker who was closing her shop and a cowboy who bought it and asked her to bake for him forever. The story of two people who took a chance on each other when they had every reason not to, who built a life and a legacy from courage and love. Their great-great-grandchildren still gathered at the ranch for holidays, still visited the graves under the pine tree, still made recipes from Olivia's book. The bakery in Las Animas still bore the Crawford name. The ranch still ran cattle and bred horses. And in quiet moments, when the wind moved through the pines and the creek sang its endless song, people swore they could feel the presence of Flynn and Olivia, still there in the land they loved, still together in death as they had been in life. The story of their love became legend in Las Animas, told and retold until no one was quite sure anymore where truth ended and myth began. But the essence remained true, the heart of it unchanged through generations. A man and a woman who found each other at exactly the right moment, who were brave enough to seize an unlikely opportunity, and who loved each other with a devotion that transcended time and death. Their headstones stood side by side under the pine tree, simple granite markers that bore their names and dates and one line that Thomas had chosen. Together they built a legacy of love. And beneath that, in smaller letters, Flynn's original words to Olivia, the words that had started it all: "Bake for me forever."